Thank you for sitting here to Good morning. Thank you for being here. And today we're looking at climate debt to finance the just transition. Climate debt to finance just transition is rooted in the recognition that wealthy industrialized nations, primarily responsible for the largest share of historical greenhouse gas emissions, owe a climate debt to poorer and often climate vulnerable nations. The climate debt refers to the responsibility high emissions countries bear for environmental degradation and climate impacts disproportionately affecting developing nations, which have contributed to the least global warming. And on the panel today is Nemo Bassi, who is an environmentalist and the director of HOMEF, and also Yvonne Yanes from Action Ecological, and Stephen Oduwari. So I'm going to ask one question to the three of you. Considering the context of the COP, what do you think countries will benefit from looking at the finance? So I'm going to start from my left.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. The issue of financing climate adaptation and mitigation has been on for a long time, and we are all aware of the targets that have been set in the past that were never met, or were barely met, or met in various ways that do not really show justice. In 2009, the target was set in the Copenhagen Accord that from 2020, the developed world would contribute $100 billion per year to help the vulnerable impacted nations to adapt to the challenges of global warming. By the time of the Paris Agreement, this deadline was shifted to 2025, and it was only last year or so that we heard that a $100 billion target was reached for the first time. But that didn't come by way of just grants, but it came with a number of measures, including loans. So it wasn't really $100 billion available to help. It was a kind of business deal to further extract resources from those who are most impacted by global warming. Now we are hearing a lot of things being said while the $100 billion target is still being discussed. We are now hearing that the cost of climate adaptation and mitigation would be in the region of $6 trillion. And so probably now we're going to have a lot of conversations about raising at least $1 trillion. But don't forget that $100 billion was not achieved on its own as additional funding to help poor, vulnerable, impacted nations. And so the COP29 provides another opportunity to see whether the world would be plain about raising finance to help those who are most impacted, understanding that the impact of on one nation also affects the global economy and everyone. And so now we are proposing that to have a fair, just climate finance, we should be talking about a recognition and payment of a climate debt. This is not a new idea, but we do understand, we must emphasize that over the years, there's been an unacceptable level of extraction, of exploitation of the countries in the global south especially, as well as the taking up of the carbon budget. Now, when the carbon budget has almost been exhausted by the polluting nations, and now we're sharing, we are struggling to share the burden of climate action, not considering the fact that someone has taken out the budget, someone has forced everyone into this crisis, and so we're calling for a recognition of that fact, and then demanding that we recognize and pay a climate debt, which is estimated at about $5 trillion by environmental economists. $5 trillion to cover the ecological losses, the social losses, as well as the economic losses.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon, and I don't know if I am morning, afternoon, because we don't see the light, no, the sunlight in this place. Anyway, so thank you very much for coming for this press conference, and I am glad to be here with my friends from Nigeria, from Africa, and yeah, I would like to mention a couple of things regarding what is the ecological and the climate debt, and this, if this has to do or not with what we are claiming since 30 years ago or more about the ecological and the climate debt. I think that if we see carefully here and in the United Nations and in the Convention of Climate Change, when they talk about that we need to find enough money to finance the needs of the southern countries. This is what is written in the documents. The needs of the southern countries. And apparently we need now, as Nemo said, $6 trillion. But I think that we really do not need this money, because this money is coming with debts, is coming with conditions, is coming through the World Bank, is coming through conditionalities of structural adjustment in our countries. So if this money is coming like this, thank you very much. We don't need neither the 100 billion money. But when we see more carefully what this word needs mean, this has nothing to do with the needs of the southern countries. This has to do with the needs of the northern countries to supposedly to say that they are reducing the emissions through the Paris Agreement and the NDCs and everything that has to do with carbon offsets. So when we talk about needs in the context of the Convention of Climate Change in the UN, we are not talking about the real needs of the southern countries that we have. And the needs should not be defined here or with a World Bank or with through the Paris Agreement. The needs should be defined from our territories, from our countries, from our people's real needs. And when we say, okay, let's talk about money, if we want, we are not going to talk about financing any real and true needs that we are going to say. But maybe we are going to talk about, okay, let's talk about funding, not financing, because financing has to do with offsets, with international financial institutions, with the financialization of nature. Finance is finance. It's very clear. But if we talk about funding, okay, let's talk about funding. And funding has to do with the recognition and the reparation of the historical, ecological debt, the climate debt, and we have to start to talk, okay, what this means, repair an ecological debt, a climate debt. Could be money, but also could be other things like to stop now the increasing of the CO2 emissions from the companies that are from the north. And because it's almost outrageous to see that when they say, okay, the southern countries need to reduce their emissions, so we are going to finance their needs. So I am going to finish here, and thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. For me, I think that the benefit for countries for the loss and damage fund is something that borders on, is a matter of, as we speak, is a matter of life and death for me. Life because when this fund is given and appropriately used to solve the issues on ground, it will help us and our communities to thrive again. It will help our communities to live again. And that's because if this is not done, then our communities will be reduced to mere geographical expressions, because our communities would most likely be wiped out, because our communities really do not have the capacity to respond to the emerging issues from the climate crisis. So it is a matter of life and death. And just to reiterate the fact that COP29 has the opportunity to write its name in history for taking the step towards actualizing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to pick up from where you ended. We're looking at the climate debt to finance the just transition. How do you think vulnerable nations will be remembered? Do you think that this climate debt is the answer that vulnerable nations need right now? So I will take from you.
Okay, I would say that the loss and damage fund is one big solution, but not in entirety all. Because if you give that fund, if that fund is given and we continue to pollute and we continue to do the things business as usual, then it's going to be a cycle, you know. So while this is a very big opportunity and a very strong point for us to solve the issues, because the issues also borders around justice, it borders around responsibility and all of that. While this is a very strong point for us to solve the issues, we have other things that we need to do. For instance, to stop the things that are causing the climate crisis that we are in. The fossil fuel regime and all of that. And even the injustices that is hidden or that underlines the extractivist model in general. So it is not the only solution, but it is a very big solution in addition to other things that would and should be done.
How do vulnerable nations benefit from this climate debt, looking at the just transition?
Well, the benefit of the southern countries of the recognition and repair of this climate debt depends. I mean, depends on how this climate debt will be repaired. If we think about reparation, this should be understood at least, let's say, with 5 principles. First of all, we have to stop what is causing the damage that we want to be repaired. And the damage is climate change, and to stop the climate change is to stop the big polluters to continue polluting. So first of all, this one principle of the ecological and the climate debt, that we, of course, not only we, the southern countries, but the planet will be benefit. The second thing is to say, okay, what is the ecological debt in very concrete terms? It means, for example, a total reparation of the territories where oil, gas, and coal has been taken and extracted. This is another principle of the recognition of the climate debt. Another thing is to ask the southern countries if we are satisfied with this reparation or not. Because if they are trying to mix climate debt with the $5 trillion and confuse, like it would be the same thing financing climate change and ecological debt, particularly in Ecuador, probably we are not satisfied with this. Because in the case of Ecuador, for example, last year, we voted in a referendum to start to keep fossil fuels on the ground. And probably one way to repair Ecuador is to say, okay, let's help you to fund this path towards a post-oil Ecuador. And this has nothing to do with what is being discussing here as ecological debt. Another thing about the ecological debt is something that has to do with the external debt. Okay, let's talk about funding, or let's talk about repayment or repair the ecological debt. but we have to start now to cancel, to annulate the external debt, the financial debt that are pushing our countries to pay back to the creditors. And we know that this external debt is unjust, is illegitimate, many times even illegal, and I think that this could be one of the fourth principles of the benefits that southern countries can have through the recognition and repair of the ecological and climate debt.
And before I give the mic to Nemo, I'll pass the mic to Joab to say something. He came in before we introduced.
Warm Pacific greetings. My name is Joape. I'm from Fiji and with the Pacific Climate Warriors. Countries in the global north most responsible for this crisis have benefited from the fossil fuel economy for decades, while our Pacific Islands, one of the least contributing regions to global emissions, bear the brunt of devastating impacts. Our homes are disappearing, our freshwater resources are being polluted, and our people are being forced to relocate our homes that have sustained us for generations. With the little resources that we have called for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty aimed to put an end to the unchecked proliferation of fossil fuels and the toxic emissions they produce. We are demanding an end to new fossil fuel projects, a just and equitable transition to renewable energy, and reparations for the loss and damage suffered by our frontline communities. This treaty is a call to high-emitting countries to recognize your historical responsibility and take action, overdue action, now to curb your emissions. We must phase out of fossil fuels and transition to a sustainable energy systems. This is not just about saving the Pacific, it's about securing a livable future for all of humanity. Your emissions are not just numbers on a chart, they are the rising tides that are drowning our homes, the storms that are destroying our crops, the heat waves that are killing our elders. Every ton of your carbon that you emit is a direct assault on our livelihoods and our right to exist. We, the Pacific people, are resilient, but our resilience has limits. You cannot continue to prioritize profit over people, convenience over climate, and inaction over justice. Our fight should be your fight too. The Pacific is a canary in the coal mine, but the impacts of climate change will not stop at our shores. The storms that batter our islands, the heat waves that scorch our lands, and the rising seas that swallow our homes will become yours too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob. And Rob help us to really situate the crisis in the lives of the people. When we talk about climate finance, it's not just about the money, as Yvonne said. We're talking about life. And the Conference of Parties have tended to be an arena for wordsmithing. We have new concepts coming up every year rather than real action happening. We heard about phasing down, not phasing out. We heard about transition just from one of fossil fuel from energy sector. And now in this COP, one term that has become very popular, that is becoming very popular, is the so-called new collective quantified goal. Well, you know, this is just stretching the matter too far. We've had a reign of voluntary action that is not solving the problem. Now we're talking about new collective quantified goal, whereas we do know who has created the problem. Why do we always place the burden on the victims? Why is the system always pushing away from real action that will save lives and save the planet? What is new collective quantified? There's no collectivity because there's no democracy in the system. So what's this nickname, this new name of getting people to feel, oh, we are a part of the solution, whereas you're struggling to survive the flood? And just to add about the issue of the climate debt we are demanding for, which is not a new idea, but which is what we've been talking about for ages. We demand that the attention should be paid to that fact that there's a debt that is being owed, that somebody has taken up the carbon budget, that the crisis is affecting certain people in a way that is disproportionate compared to where the problem is coming from. And then the finance should not be a new system of trapping down the poor, vulnerable nations. That is why concepts like climate swap for debt concept is just another way of allowing the polluters to keep polluting. So we're asking for real action, real funding, and a real chance of the planet surviving and people living in dignity and with their rights.
Thank you. We'll open the floor for any question. If you have any questions, please signify by raise of hand before I ask them the final question up here. Please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Ümit Şahin. I'm from Turkey, from Istanbul Policy Center. What do you think about the new developments about Article 6.4?
We can hear you.
Sorry?
Please speak up.
Okay. What do you think about recent developments about Article 6.4, which was just in the beginning, in the opening session, it was a swift approval about some rules and procedures? And do you think, is there a risk of replacing these kind of carbon markets coming from removals, etc., with the necessary funding for developing countries?
Okay, thank you so much. I think that's a very, very pertinent question. We were very surprised that at the opening day of the COP, that kind of decision was reached so quickly. And of course, Vanuatu, among others, said that, well, this issue ought to have been discussed fully by the parties before the gavel came on the decision. But I guess COP hosts always want to show that they achieved something, and so maybe that is why that happened on the very first day. Now, it has opened a floodgate for carbon trading, carbon market. We do know that carbon speculators are almost turning the COP into a carbon trade fair. And this is all going to add up to creating more problems for those who are suffering the impacts of global warming, because carbon trading, carbon credits is not solving the climate problem. It's only giving the license to polluters to do more, to pollute more. And of course, it's also creating carbon colonialism and carbon slavery in poor countries, where communities are now going to be forced to watch over carbon in trees or in the river or in the soil, instead of being helped to adapt to the crisis they did not create. So we're very worried that that approval of that decision could also allow for new forms of geoengineering, including marine geoengineering, which we are totally against, because as our brother from Fiji, who lives in the ocean, literally mentioned, this will create a lot of problems for communities and for the world, because the ocean is life, and the ocean is one. And, so this COP has started on a note that is alarming to some of us, because if carbon trading takes the ascendancy and becomes the flag of climate action, then of course we might as well go home, because we are set for real trouble.
Any other question? Okay. Yes, you want to?
Just 1 minute before finishing. When I was coming from Ecuador to Baku, my grandchild, which is half Palestinian, he asked me, "Where are you going, Grandma?" And I told him that I am going to the conference of polluters. And he couldn't understand. And I say, yes, because what is happening in these COPs since almost the beginning is a conference, as Nimo said, as a carbon fair trade, is a conference of polluters. And that we are here is denouncing what is happening again here in these COPs, that is continuously the expansion of oil activities, the expansion of mining activities, the expansion of the harmful energies that are causing the climate change. So I would like to finish with this, and also to invite you to participate in the demonstrations to denounce the genocides also against Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In 30 seconds, I would like to get your pattern shot.
Okay, mine is to urge every one of us to add our voices, to join our hands. Let's stand shoulder to shoulder and confront these issues that are before us, because if we don't do it, we become even complicit. Thank you.
Okay.
So So just a final remark to your question about carbon credits. I think they're a shortcut. I think it gives countries in the global north, especially countries that perpetuate oil mining, oil drilling, and coal mining efforts, to continue their work. So I think at COP29, especially if we're discussing climate finance, especially if we want to meet our targets, we need to set ambitious goals. We need legal frameworks that address common but differentiated responsibilities in order to phase out of fossil fuels and transition to sustainable economies and sustainable frameworks. So, thank you.
Let me just add very quickly that the issue of climate finance is not, we're not talking about something that is undoable. There is sufficient finance in the world to meet the needs of poor, vulnerable, challenged nations and territories. How do we know this? Look at the budget that industrialized rich nations use for warfare. Last year they spent at least $2.4 trillion. And we're talking about $100 billion for climate change, you can't get it. But when it comes to destruction, the money is never in short supply. This must be kept in mind when we're debating whether to fund or not to fund. So thank you so much.
Thank you for being part of this conference, and we hope that we'll have conversations outside. And please meet Nemo, Yvonne, and Stephen outside for quick interviews. Thank you.
Quite realistic to turn up and jump on stage. You weren't expecting it at all. Is that kind of just hold this up? So it's just a TV, don't worry. Oh, just hold it up on the face. Your name and your face. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.